You think you're an adult, but half of your reactions still belong to the child no one loved enough. Tonight, we're going to expose the 7 signs that the unloved child you once were is still the one running your emotional life, quietly, painfully, and more truthfully than you want to admit. You don't talk about it. You don't show it. You don't even admit it to yourself. But the truth slips out in the way you apologize too quickly, trust too slowly, and expect disappointment before anything good can happen. The unloved child inside you didn't disappear. You just learned how to dress it up with strength, independence, and silence. People call you mature, but it's not maturity. It's emotional self-protection. You grew up believing your feelings annoyed people. You learned that love had conditions. You learned that comfort wasn't guaranteed. You learned that being easy was the safest way to exist. And now as an adult, you take responsibility for everything. You forgive too fast, you give too much, and you ask for nothing. Because the child in you still believes you're not worth choosing. This isn't weakness. It's childhood programming. Programming that still decides how deeply you love, how little you expect, and how quickly you blame yourself for things you didn't cause. You say sorry far too often, not because you made a mistake, but because somewhere deep inside, you still believe it's your job to keep everyone comfortable. That belief didn't start in adulthood. It started the moment you learned as a child that people got irritated, disappointed, or cold. And you thought their reactions were your responsibility. You grew up sensing emotional shifts long before anyone said a word. A sigh in the next room, a heavy footstep, a voice that changed slightly in tone. Those tiny signals trained your nervous system in a way no adult ever noticed. You learned to read danger in moods, not actions. And over time, you developed a habit of if something felt unstable, you took responsibility for it. Not because it belonged to you, but because playing the peacemaker was the only role that gave you a sense of control. That habit didn't disappear with age. It followed you into adulthood like a quiet shadow. So now when someone seems distant, your first thought is that you caused it. When someone looks irritated, you brace yourself without knowing why. When a room grows tense, you instinctively shrink, soften, adjust. Not to manipulate, but to survive the way you used to. People around you think you're considerate. They think you're emotionally intelligent. Some even admire how self-aware and respectful you are. But they don't realize that underneath that calm surface is a nervous system that has been conditioned to carry blame it never earned. You apologize to avoid conflict you've never actually caused. You apologize to keep people close, even when they're not pulling away. You apologize because your mind still believes that someone getting upset means you failed them somehow. What looks like maturity is actually an old defense mechanism that never got the chance to rest. And here's the painful truth. You don't apologize because you're wrong. You apologize because you're still afraid of what happens when you stop taking responsibility for everyone else's emotions. This isn't politeness. It's the unloved child inside you, trying to earn safety in a world that never gave it freely. You carry emotional weight that was never yours, not because you want to, but because you grew up in an environment where other people's moods were unpredictable enough to shape your entire nervous system. As a child, you learned to scan the room. Before you said anything, you learned to predict reactions, to soften your presence, to step in before conflict grew, to calm people who should have been calming you. You became sensitive to tension, the way other children were sensitive to hunger or cold. Your body reacted to emotional shifts as if they were physical danger. And now, even as an adult, you move through the world with the same hyper-awareness. You notice when someone's expression changes. You sense when someone is irritated. You pick up on subtle disappointment that others barely register. You don't just feel your own emotions. You feel everyone else's as well as if they belong to you. When someone around you is upset, you automatically step into the role of stabilizer. You adjust your tone, you filter your words, you change your behavior to create balance even when no one asked you to. And here's the part you never say out loud. You don't do this out of kindness. You do it because the unloved child inside you still believes that peace is something you must earn, not something you deserve. You learned early that other people's anger was your job to prevent. Other people's sadness was your job to fix. Other people's stress was your job to carry. So now when someone is hurting, you go into emotional overdrive. You shape yourself around their needs, as if their feelings determine your safety. But the truth is simple. You were never meant to be the emotional parent of the people around you. You stepped into that role because no one stepped into it for you. And that's why this sign cuts so deeply. You're still trying to create the harmony you never received, hoping that if you keep everyone else balanced, you'll finally feel stable too. But you won't. Not until you realize that emotional responsibility was forced onto you long before you had the strength to carry it. You walk into every connection with one quiet assumption. At some point, the other person will pull away. Not because they've shown any sign of it, not because their relationship is unstable, but because the unloved child in you learned early. That affection was temporary, and attention could disappear without warning. When you were younger, the people you needed most were inconsistent with their love, warm one moment, distant the next, present when it suited them, gone when you needed comfort the most. That unpredictability taught you something dangerous, that closeness is fragile and belonging is conditional. And so now as an adult, even when someone treats you well, a part of you waits for the shift. You watch for signs that aren't there. You interpret silence as distance. You see a slow reply as losing interest. You mistake a tired tone for disappointment in you. It doesn't matter how steady a person is. You can't feel secure because security was never something you grew up with. You hold back the deeper parts of yourself, not because you're cold, but because you're terrified of being too much. For someone who hasn't even asked you to shrink, you test people without meaning to. You pull away first. You withdraw emotionally, thinking that if you detach early, it won't hurt as much when they inevitably do the same. But here's the truth behind this sign. You're not afraid of losing them. You're afraid of re-experiencing the same emotional abandonment you felt long before you had the language for it. Your adult relationships are not failing. Your childhood is echoing. And until you recognize that echo, every connection will feel temporary, even when it isn't. When someone shows you genuine care, your first instinct isn't to accept it. It's to doubt it. Not because the love feels wrong, but because it feels unfamiliar. You grew up in a world where affection was inconsistent, where warmth came with conditions where you were praised for being easier, quiet, or useful, not simply for being yourself. So when someone treats you with real softness now, your mind automatically looks for the catch. You wonder what they want. You wonder how long it will last. You wonder what you have to do to keep them from changing their mind. You don't relax into love. You brace for it to disappear. And even when someone is consistent, even when their actions match their words, you feel a tension inside you that you can't explain. A feeling that you shouldn't get too close, that you should stay partially guarded, that you shouldn't rely on anyone because relying on someone once led to pain. You were too young to process. So you hold back pieces of yourself, not because you want to, but because trusting love feels like stepping into a room you were never taught how to enter. And here's the part that hurts the most. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're actually protecting the wound, the part of you that remembers what it felt like. To crave affection that never came to offer softness to people who didn't know how to hold it, to wait for love that always felt one step out of reach. You don't struggle to receive love because you're broken. You struggle because the unloved child inside you still doesn't believe good things stay. Real love feels dangerous when your earliest experiences taught you that emotional safety was something you had to earn and could lose at any moment. You tolerate things that exhaust you, not because you're weak, but because your nervous system was shaped to believe that staying quiet is safer than walking away. As a child, you didn't have the option to leave environments that hurt you emotionally. You couldn't step back. You couldn't set boundaries. You couldn't choose better people. You survived by adapting, by absorbing stress, minimizing yourself, and holding everything together because nobody else did. And now, even as an adult with freedom and autonomy, your body reacts as if you're still trapped. You stay longer than you should. You tolerate more than you deserve. You silence discomfort because confrontation still feels dangerous, the same way it felt when you were small. You rationalize other people's behavior. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You focus on their potential instead of their reality. You make excuses you don't even believe. And deep down, you're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of the guilt, the conflict, the emotional chaos that leaving might trigger. You're afraid of being seen as ungrateful, too sensitive, too dramatic. All the things you were labeled when you were young and simply trying to express pain. So you endure, you adjust, you shrink your needs to match the environment just like you did back then. Staying feels familiar. Leaving feels like a risk. That's how you know the unloved child is still inside you. They're choosing survival, even when you finally have the chance to choose peace. One of the clearest signs that the unloved child is still inside you is the quiet confusion you feel when someone asks, "What do you need?" You freeze because you genuinely don't know. Not because you're indecisive, but because you grew up in an environment where your needs were either ignored, dismissed, or punished. You learned early that expressing them only led to disappointment or conflict. So you adapted. You stopped identifying your needs. You buried them under responsibility, performance, survival. And now, as an adult, you move through life without a real sense of what brings you comfort, what gives you energy, what makes you feel supported, or what genuinely hurts you. You've become so skilled at enduring that you don't even recognize the moment you're reaching your limit until your body forces you to. Sudden exhaustion, a wave of numbness, an emotional shutdown you can't explain. These aren't random. They're the needs you never learned to notice. Breaking through the surface all at once. You go from "I'm fine" to "I can't do this anymore" because there was never a middle ground in your childhood. You never had the space to explore your wants or the safety to express them. So now you wait. You wait until you're drained, overwhelmed, disconnected from yourself. And only then do you realize you needed rest, support, boundaries, or comfort much earlier. The unloved child didn't learn to ask, and the adult version of you still carries the same silence. This sign isn't about weakness, it's about emotional amnesia. A life spent surviving leaves very little room for discovering what actually nourishes you. There's a moment you don't talk about, the moment when someone looks at you, not just with interest, but with real understanding. Not the polite kind, not the surface level curiosity, but the kind of attention that feels like it reaches places in you. You've spent years keeping hidden, and instead of warmth, you feel a quiet panic. That reaction comes from one place: the unloved child who grew up believing that being truly seen meant being judged, misunderstood, or rejected. When someone gets close enough to notice your patterns, your fears, your emotional shortcuts, your longing for connection, you instinctively pull back. You change the subject. You make a joke. You mask the discomfort with a smile that doesn't match the moment. Because deep down, you're convinced that if someone sees you fully, they will eventually walk away. That the real you isn't enough to keep anyone. That being known is dangerous. So even in safe relationships, you give people only the version of you that feels manageable. The calm one, the supportive one, the strong one, the one who never asked for too much. The version that costs you the least to maintain. But the part of you that flinches when someone sees your softness is the same part that grew up believing you had to earn every bit of love you ever received. And that's the final sign. You don't fear intimacy. You fear being recognized. Because recognition exposes the child who never felt chosen. Yet here's the truth you've ignored for years. The part of you work so hard to hide is the part that's still waiting to be loved the way you needed back then. And the moment you accept that, you stop living as the wounded version of your past and start becoming the person your childhood didn't allow you to be. You need to understand one thing. You are not that child anymore. You don't have to live by their fears, their silence, their wounds, or their old rules. You don't have to apologize for existing. You don't have to carry emotions that aren't yours. You don't have to shrink just to feel safe. You are the adult now. You have choices, boundaries, power, the very things you never had back then. So stop identifying with the version of you that only knew survival. Rebuild yourself. Rewrite your patterns. Become the strong, steady, grounded human you always needed someone else to be. And most importantly, learn to recognize your triggers, not as proof that you're broken, but as reminders of how far you've already come. You're not the unloved child anymore. You're the adult who gets to love yourself now.